14. Josh Anderson. 35-year-old mother of two Iris Billy was fatally struck in a hit-and-run while walking along a road on the White Mountain Apache Reservation in Arizona. The incident took place on Thanksgiving morning in 2023. During the investigation, officers noticed that one of the department's vehicles at the scene bore damage consistent with having hit a pedestrian. The vehicle was assigned to Officer Josh Anderson, a 20-year-old member of the force who now stands accused of committing the hit-and-run and returning to the scene to participate in the investigation. He also joined 3 other officers who delivered the death notification to Billy's family. The officers who noticed the damage to his patrol car didn't immediately arrest him, but became increasingly suspicious as they noticed more and more things about the situation that didn't add up. Anderson was arrested after a thorough examination of his vehicle confirmed the damage fit the crime. He faces charges of assault causing serious physical injury, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and criminal negligence. He was also charged with reckless driving, death caused by a vehicle, leaving the scene of a fatal collision, and interference with an officer. Following his arrest, Anderson resigned from the police department. For now, the case is ongoing and remains under investigation by the FBI. 13. Scott Peterson. In one of the most high-profile murder cases to make American news headlines in recent decades, 27-year-old Laci Peterson vanished from her Modesto, California home on Christmas Eve in 2002 while 8 months pregnant. Her husband, Scott, claimed that he had returned home from a fishing trip 90 miles away to find the house empty and Laci's car still in the driveway. Investigators were immediately suspicious of Scott. He was far too calm and collected for a husband whose pregnant wife was missing, almost to the point where it seemed like he didn't care where Laci was or what had happened to her. Law enforcement's suspicions were heightened when they discovered that Scott had engaged in 3 extramarital affairs throughout his 5-year marriage to Laci, including one that was ongoing at the time of her disappearance. Scott's mistress, Amber Frey, reported their affair to police after learning that Scott was a person of interest in the case. She told investigators that Scott had told her he was single when they first met a month before Laci went missing. A few months before Laci vanished, Scott told Amber that he was a widower and that it would be his first Christmas after his wife's death. In addition to being a serial cheater, Scott wasn't much of a fisherman, and his sudden interest in the sport came with curious timing. He bought his boat just weeks before Laci went missing and said that he only spent an hour fishing on Christmas Eve, despite driving out of his way to Berkeley Marina. There were plenty of places that were closer where he could have gone fishing, which only further called his actions into question. And while Scott claimed the fishing trip was unplanned, records showed that he purchased a 2-day fishing license the day before Laci's disappearance. He also gave conflicting stories about several things and drove to the marina numerous times in the month after his wife vanished, only to look out at the water for a few minutes and head back home. Meanwhile, a hair belonging to Laci was found in Scott's boat, even though she didn't know about the boat when she was alive. In April 2003, the remains of Laci and her unborn child were found along the shore of the San Francisco Bay. On the day the bodies were identified, Scott was caught driving toward the Mexico border with a car full of camping gear, multiple cell phones, several outfits, and $50,000 cash. He had dyed his hair blonde, and he claimed he was on his way to play golf with his father and brother. Scott's father would later try to explain the overstuffed car by claiming that his son was living in his car to avoid the media circus surrounding the case. The case was largely circumstantial, but prosecutors moved forward with murder charges. In court, they argued that Scott had plenty of motives for wanting Laci dead, including a history of telling people he didn't want to be a father and overwhelming debts from his failing business. In 2004, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. In 2020, an appeals court upheld Scott's guilty verdict but overturned his death sentence. He was resentenced to life in prison and has continued to appeal his case. The case has attracted renewed interest in recent years, and in a stunning turn of events, the Los Angeles Innocence Project announced in early 2024 that it was taking on Scott's case. In a court filing, the organization's director, Paula Mitchell, wrote that recently discovered evidence could potentially expose deficiencies in the case's discovery process. Many people are outraged at the nonprofit's decision to take on the case. But a growing group of armchair detectives and web sleuths have started buying into the idea that Scott might actually be innocent. 12. Christopher Watts. Doting mother of two Shannon Watts candidly shared her life on social media from Frederick, Colorado, where she lived with her husband, Christopher, and their two kids. She often spoke about how blessed she felt to be married and raising a family with the love of her life. By all appearances, the Watts family was living the American dream. Christopher had a high-paying job while Shannon stayed home with the kids and followed her own pursuits as an aspiring businesswoman. The couple owned a nice house, and in 2018, Shannon revealed to Christopher that they would soon be adding another family member to it. Shortly after announcing her pregnancy, Shannon vanished along with the couple's two daughters, Bella and Celeste. Her friends reported her missing after failing to reach her by phone and discovering that she wasn't at home, even though her car was in the garage with the kids' car seats in it. Christopher acted suspiciously unfazed by his family's disappearance, and he was also acting out of character. A neighbor even pulled the police aside to tell them that Watts was acting a lot more nervous and anxious than usual, and that he didn't think it was caused by the typical stress of having a loved one disappearing. But Christopher cooperated with law enforcement, earning him the benefit of the doubt for the time being. He allowed police to search the house, where they found Shannon's purse, keys, and phone, which she never went anywhere without. As the investigation played out, detectives became increasingly suspicious of Christopher. He failed a polygraph, seemed like he was only pretending to worry about his family in a plea for their safe return, and was having an affair with a co-worker. His mistress, Nicole Gessinger, showed up at the police station and told investigators that Christopher had told her he was in the process of divorcing Shannon. She believed that the couple had separated, even though they still lived together and had been planning for a future with Christopher. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Shannon had confided in her friends about how Christopher had completely lost interest in her. Whenever she tried getting him to open up about what was wrong, he insisted that everything was fine. Shortly before she went missing, Shannon noticed that Christopher had paid a large tab at a restaurant while she was on a business trip. She suspected that he'd paid for another person's meal, leading her to believe that he might be having an affair. Under pressure from interrogators, Christopher finally cracked and admitted that Shannon, Bella, and Celeste were no longer alive. Their bodies were found at one of his work sites, and he was charged with their murders. After months of maintaining his innocence, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for having the death penalty taken off the table. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent life terms. Christopher eventually came clean to the FBI about what really happened, admitting that he didn't want another child and already felt burdened by the demands of marriage and fatherhood. He admitted to planning the murders months in advance, yet claimed that he snapped and strangled Shannon during an argument about him wanting a divorce. Watts now spends his days working as a prison janitor, obsessing over the Bible as a self-proclaimed born-again Christian. He also frequently responds to letters from the throngs of women who write to him in bizarre support of his innocence, even though he'd admitted to his crimes. Luckily for the rest of society, though, he'll never see the light of day again outside prison walls. 11. Michael Beauchamp. 41-year-old Ginger Gover went radio silent in 2018 after stopping to fix a flat tire on her way to a friend's house in Pierce County, Washington. After not hearing from her for several days, the woman's family reported her missing. Ginger's father, Wayne Phillips, told investigators that his daughter used to run in bad circles and that she had information about a serious crime that had taken place in the past. This, in his opinion, potentially made her a target for someone who might want to silence her. More specifically, Ginger knew about an arson and burglary that a man in his 50s named Michael Beauchamp had participated in. About a month after she went missing, her car was found abandoned outside a warehouse in Boyalup. Another week after that, construction workers discovered Ginger's body in a wooded area while clearing the way for a new road. Sadly, she had been fatally shot. Witnesses soon told investigators that Beauchamp had recently started commenting on how he had to make Ginger disappear because she had rolled on him. A search of his home and vehicle turned up blood spatter evidence throughout several parts of the house, including Beauchamp's bedroom, garage, and in his truck. In July 2023, a jury found Beauchamp guilty of first-degree aggravated murder, second-degree murder, first-degree assault, and second-degree malicious mischief. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 10. Felix Thomas. In what initially appeared to be an unfortunate tragedy, 37-year-old Janina Gravette's Ford Fusion was found crashed into some trees along a Henry County, Alabama highway in June of 2018. Gravette's long-term partner, 36-year-old Felix Thomas, took her to a nearby residence home for help. She was rushed to the hospital, where she passed away after spending several days on life support. Evidence at the crash site indicated that Gravette's car may have been traveling as fast as 90 miles per hour when it crashed. However, keen-eyed investigators noticed that several of her injuries were inconsistent with being caused in a vehicle accident. It led detectives to believe that Thomas had beaten Gravette and possibly slammed her head into the pavement. Authorities arrested him on suspicion of murder, and the case has dragged its heels in the state court system ever since, as it encounters one delay after another. Gravette's mother, Tina Roger Miller, had told the local station WSFA that her daughter dated Thomas on and off for around 10 years. She accused Thomas of being highly abusive toward Gravette, who eventually sought refuge at a women's shelter in an attempt to get away from him. But she ended up going back to Thomas, and her mother believes that she paid for it with her life. In addition to an alleged history of domestic violence, including a previous incident involving a different woman, Thomas has been arrested numerous times on allegations of theft, burglary, and illegal drug charges. The case was finally about to go to trial in September 2023, when Thomas's defense attorney requested a postponement. He claimed that he wasn't aware of certain testimony prosecutors planned to present, and that he therefore had not prepared to address it at trial. As of January 2024, a new trial date has not been set. 9. John Blauvelt and Hannah Thompson. 22-year-old Catherine "Catty" Blauvelt disappeared in October 2016 after finishing her shift at a pet store in Greenville, South Carolina. By the time her body was found in the basement of an abandoned house in nearby Simpsonsville 2 days later, her estranged husband, John Blauvelt, had ditched the military and fled the state with his teenage girlfriend Hannah Thompson. Catty's body was covered in stab wounds, making it clear that she had died at the hands of foul play. Naturally, John Blauvelt landed at the top of the suspect list, but authorities couldn't find him. He was charged in absentia with murder and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. After spending a few months with Blauvelt, Thompson returned to South Carolina. When questioned about Blauvelt's whereabouts, she allegedly claimed that he'd disappeared one day and that she didn't know where he was. Detectives would later learn that Thompson and Blauvelt had been living on the streets of Oregon. Finally, in 2022, a team of cold case investigators tracked Blauvelt to Medford, Oregon. 6 years after going AWOL, the former Army recruiter was living under the alias Ben Klein. He was apprehended by the U.S. Marshals and extradited back to South Carolina, where he remains in custody while awaiting trial. Hannah Thompson is also facing multiple charges for allegedly helping Blauvelt cover up Catty's murder, including 2 counts of misprison or concealment, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of accessory after the fact. According to prosecutors, she drove behind Blauvelt to the site where Catty's car was abandoned and gave him a ride back home. She's also accused of withholding information about Blauvelt's location following her return to South Carolina. 8. Eric Scott Sills. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in November 2016, a 911 caller, later identified as renowned fertility doctor Eric Scott Sills, reported finding his wife dead at the bottom of a staircase in their San Clemente, California home. He said that 45-year-old Susan Sills must have fallen, but investigators quickly noticed that things didn't add up. The placement of Susan's body on the bottom of the steps conflicted with Sills' claims that he'd moved her to a flat surface to perform CPR. There was also blood evidence found elsewhere throughout the house, indicating that a struggle had taken place. It took a year for the medical pathologist who performed Susan's autopsy to conclude that she'd been strangled to death. Meanwhile, a search of the couple's phones revealed a plethora of text messages showing just how toxic their relationship was. In one message, Susan said she would never be free and pleaded with Sills to just let her leave the relationship. Sills was charged with his wife's murder. When the case finally went to trial in 2023, he stuck to his story about Susan falling down the stairs and dying in a freak accident. He argued that she was most likely disoriented from not eating for a few days and because she had opioids in her system. His attorneys further claimed that the blood found throughout the house came from an unrelated injury that occurred long before Susan's death. Prosecutors accused Sills of murdering Susan during a heated argument. However, they could only speculate on the cause of the disagreement. But prosecutors argued that there was plenty to fight about. After all, Susan was clearly miserable and felt trapped in the marriage. The couple was also known to fight about money and the amount of alimony Sills paid to his previous wife. In December 2023, a jury found Sills guilty of second-degree murder. He faces 15 years to life in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in March of 2024. 7. Chelsea Erikson. 47-year-old John Emmerich was walking along a highway in Delta Junction, Alaska, late at night in August 2023 when he was fatally struck by a hit-and-run driver. Officers arrived at the scene to find Emmerich lying lifeless in the road, surrounded by debris from a blue vehicle. They identified the suspect as 32-year-old Chelsea Erikson with help from tipsters, who said that the woman told them she'd hit a moose at around the same time as the hit-and-run. One person claimed that Erikson was intoxicated and crying shortly after the accident. During questioning, Erikson allegedly admitted to being in the area near the time of the fatal collision. She stuck to her story about hitting a moose, claiming that the injured animal ran off into the woods after being struck. Police looked for a wounded moose but never found one. So they obtained a warrant to search Erikson's property, where they found her damaged blue pickup truck locked in a detached garage with another vehicle blocking the entrance. Parts of the vehicle were missing and never found, and troopers observed what appeared to be moose hair sprinkled in the engine compartment. But there was no hair caught in the grille or front end of the vehicle like there normally would be if it had hit a moose. This detail led the investigators to believe that Erikson had attempted to cover up the true nature of the truck's damage. A moose mount on a nearby wall appeared to be missing some clumps of hair, heightening law enforcement's already heavy suspicions. Erikson had also applied for a passport with apparent plans to travel to Mexico after the hit and run, but she won't be going anywhere anytime soon. Based on the findings of their investigation, authorities charged the suspect with criminally negligent homicide, failure to render assistance at an accident scene, and tampering with evidence. They also arrested Chelsea's mother, 60-year-old Janelle Erikson, on suspicion of tampering with evidence. 6. Todd Kendhammer. 46-year-old Barbara Kendhammer met her untimely demise in September 2016 when she sustained fatal injuries in what initially appeared to be a freak car accident in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Barbara's husband, 47-year-old Todd Kendhammer, told police that a large pipe had fallen off a truck as it passed the couple's vehicle in the opposite direction. Kendhammer further claimed that the pipe had landed on the windshield, causing the injuries that killed his wife. The story seemed off to investigators, who spoke with a witness who said that he drove past the Kendhammers' disabled vehicle and didn't see anyone at the scene. He also said that the car was already in the ditch, but the windshield was still intact. Despite their doubts about Todd's narrative, police released a be on the lookout notice for the truck that the pipe had supposedly fallen from, which he was only able to give a vague description of. In the meantime, the Kendhammers' car was sent to the state crime lab for analysis. When asked where he and Barbara were going at the time of the accident, Todd initially claimed that he was going to pick up a truck from a man who needed his windshield replaced, something Todd seemed to specialize in at his job. After that, Barbara planned to go to her job at a local school. However, the man who Todd claimed he was fixing a windshield for didn't need or ask for Todd's services, because his windshield wasn't broken. And as it turned out, Todd worked for a company that serviced windshields, but it wasn't part of his job. Detectives' suspicions were further heightened when they noticed that Todd had injuries inconsistent with having been in a car accident, including extensive wounds to his knuckles. Barbara's injuries also told a much different story than that of dying in a car wreck. It appeared as though she had been beaten, and Todd's DNA was found beneath her fingernails. Law enforcement tracked down surveillance footage that proved that no trucks drove past the Kendhammers leading up to the accident, further indicating that Barbara had been met with foul play. Todd was charged with murder, but continued to maintain his innocence, claiming that the discrepancies in his stories were caused by the stress. The defense also argued that Todd had no motive for killing Barbara, and they weren't wrong. Even the prosecution conceded that there were no signs of anything majorly wrong in the couple's marriage, including no affairs, no money problems, and no history of domestic violence. The jury nevertheless convicted Tom of Barbara's murder, and he received an automatic life sentence without parole. 5. Brad Strebnik and Joshua Wergau. In August 2021, 18-year-old Bryn Bills disappeared in Alpena County, Michigan, and nearly 2 months later, Bryn's friend, 31-year-old Abby Hill, also vanished. Acting on a tip just days after Abby's disappearance, police found Bryn's body buried in the yard of 35-year-old Joshua Wergau, who became a person of interest for obvious reasons but wasn't immediately arrested. Then, a month after the discovery of Bryn's remains, authorities found Abby Hill's body in a local wooded area. Wergau initially lied to police about what he knew about the cases. He eventually turned himself in and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. According to what he now claims is the true version of events, Abby Hill and another friend, 36-year-old Brad Strebnik, showed up at his house with Bryn Bill's body shortly after her murder. Using a rented excavator, the trio buried Bryn's body in Wergau's yard. The suspect's motive for killing the young woman remains unclear. Over the following weeks, Strebnik allegedly became increasingly paranoid that Abby would talk about Bryn's murder, putting them at risk of getting caught. Roughly a month after Bryn disappeared, Strebnik shot Hill dead in cold blood after luring her into the woods under the guise of going camping. Wergau was present during Hill's murder, but claimed he didn't know Strebnik was going to kill the young woman, whose body was left at the scene. When asked why he initially lied to the police, he said that he was scared of what Strebnik might do to his family if he told the truth. In exchange for his testimony against Strebnik and a prison sentence of 15 to 30 years, Wergau pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, disinterment, mutilation of a dead body, and felony accessory after the fact. As of early February 2024, Strebnik's trial is ongoing. He stands accused of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of mutilation of dead bodies, and weapon-related charges. 4. Gualberto LeBron. In May 2018, police were called to the Newark, New Jersey home of 30-year-old Julia Vega in response to a reported domestic incident. Vega told officers that the father of her children, 33-year-old Gualberto LeBron, had choked and assaulted her. But by then, LeBron had fled the home. He managed to avoid law enforcement during a manhunt while threatening to kill Vega if she didn't drop the charges against him stemming from the domestic dispute. 4 days after the initial incident, LeBron broke into Vega's residence and killed her when she returned home on her lunch break to walk her dogs. He enlisted his older brother, Gualberto LeBron Jr., to help him dispose of the victim's body. The brothers placed Vega's remains in a sealed garbage bag filled with chemicals to hasten the decomposition process, loaded the body into the victim's minivan, and dumped it behind an abandoned property. Vega's body was found about a month after her murder. Gualberto LeBron was apprehended a year later by a fugitive task force following a vehicle pursuit. Gualberto LeBron Jr. was also charged in connection with the murder. The case finally went to trial in 2023 and ended in guilty verdicts for Gualberto on 21 out of 24 counts. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence, assault, burglary, witness tampering, desecrating human remains, and conspiracy. Gualberto was convicted of hindering prosecution and desecrating human remains and received an 8-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 4 years. 3. Elizabeth Ann Ludwig and Brandon Ziperl. 23-year-old Brooklyn Tyree vanished in Salt Lake City, Utah in May of 2022 after being last seen with the father of her child, 28-year-old Brandon Ziperl. 3 days later, Ziperl sent a text message to Tyree's family claiming that she'd dropped their son off with him and taken off. He said that Tyree was tired of taking care of the child and told the family that they would never see him again. When they asked Ziperl where the young woman had gone, he said he didn't know and he didn't care. After finding Tyree's apartment in disarray, the family filed a missing persons report. Later that same day, her body was found in a remote part of the desert in Tooele County. Unfortunately, she'd been fatally shot in the back of the head. The last known surveillance footage of Tyree showed her getting into a vehicle with Ziperl outside her apartment building. And cell phone data reportedly tied Ziperl to the location where Tyree's body was found. While searching Ziperl's home, police found a shoe belonging to his fiancée, 28-year-old Elizabeth Ludwig, which matched a footprint that was left behind near Tyree's remains. At the time of the murder, Ziperl already had previous assault and theft convictions, and he was on probation from an earlier case. Under pressure from detectives, he allegedly admitted to shooting Tyree, disposing of her personal belongings, and pawning the murder weapon. Ludwig confessed to helping Ziperl get rid of the evidence and said she assisted in moving the body. While the motive for the crime is unclear, Tyree's sister told ABC4 News that the victim began to fear for her life after her relationship with Ziperl turned toxic. In court, Ziperl claimed that he lost his temper after hearing about possible drug use in his child's presence. In the end, he took a plea deal and admitted to a murder charge in exchange for a sentence of 15 years to life. Elizabeth Ludwig also took a deal and pleaded guilty to felony obstruction of justice. She was spared from prison time and instead was sentenced to 3 years of probation. 2. David Harvey. A week after she was last seen alive in August 2022, 63-year-old Carolyn Jenkins was found murdered in some bushes behind a St. Louis apartment complex. Suspicion quickly fell on her 72-year-old ex-boyfriend and neighbor David Harvey, who allegedly continued to harass Carolyn and broke into her apartment after she ended their relationship several weeks earlier. Carolyn did everything in her power to put an end to the harassment, including changing her logs and complaining to the police. But it continued, and she was ultimately stabbed to death. Surveillance footage from the day the grandmother went missing appeared to show 2 men wheeling Carolyn's body right past a security guard during the pre-dawn hours. News of the video enraged Carolyn's family, who claimed that she complained to the building's management repeatedly about Harvey's harassment and that they failed to take action. In a lawsuit, they accused management of even giving Harvey a key to Carolyn's apartment. The victim's loved ones also claimed that the building's surveillance footage showed Harvey following Carolyn to her apartment and rushing inside before she could lock the door. In December 2023, authorities announced charges against Harvey, who's accused of murdering Carolyn, and the victim's neighbor, 73-year-old John Day, who allegedly helped Harvey dispose of Carolyn's body. As of early 2024, Harvey remains behind bars while awaiting trial. Harvey's arrest came 8 years after he was accused of fatally shooting a pregnant mother of 5 named India Blake, who was found in an alleyway with a bullet wound to the head. He was acquitted of first-degree murder but was convicted of gun charges. While investigating Harvey's past, news station First Alert 4 found a lengthy rap sheet dating back to the 1970s, including prior convictions for burglary and assault. When he was arrested in 2015 following India Blake's death, the woman's family demanded to know why he wasn't in prison given his extensive record. They're currently in the process of suing the owner of the apartment complex and the security company that staffs the building, claiming that the respondents failed to protect Carolyn. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Antonia Poloo and Kristen Schrank. During her 7 years as an assistant district attorney in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, Kristen Schrank was occasionally required to be on call outside regular business hours to assist law enforcement with any questions they might have. In July of 2023, she was assigned to be the on-duty DA for a week while moonlighting as a bartender. Expecting a busy night, she reached out to former homicide prosecutor Antonia Poloo, who'd left the DA's office the previous year, and asked if he would monitor her government-issued phone while she worked. Poloo said yes, but he wasn't authorized to carry or use the phone, and apparently they didn't discuss how Schrank would explain a man's voice answering the phone when a female was the on-duty DA. Sure enough, the phone received a call from a member of the Fox Point Police Department regarding the arrest of a 43-year-old suspected drunk driver named Orlando Trimble. In addition to the DUI charge, Trimble was arrested on suspicion of obstruction and felony resisting arrest. An officer was reportedly injured while taking him into custody, and Trimble was hospitalized after falling and hitting his head on the pavement. The officer wanted advice on whether or not to obtain a warrant for a blood sample and was taken aback when a man answered the phone. Poloo advised the officer to get a warrant, and when the officer asked for his name, he identified himself as an intern who he knew was currently employed with the DA's office. Suspicious about why an intern answered the phone, the officer's supervisor called Schrank's on-duty number. This time, Schrank answered, claiming that her friend had answered the phone for her while she was in the shower. Worried that she had been busted, Schrank attended Trimble's first court appearance and dropped the case without explanation, even though the charges had been filed by a different prosecutor. After noticing the intern's name on the police report, another member of the DA's office questioned the intern, who said that he never answered Schrank's phone or spoke with the police officer about obtaining a blood sample warrant. An investigation was launched, and shortly thereafter, text messages between Schrank and Poloo were revealed. Schrank had correctly predicted that her dismissal of Trimble's case would make it look like she was trying to cover her own shady behavior. But Poloo talked her into dropping the charges, apparently believing the whole situation would just quietly get swept under the rug. When questioned by the officer who was injured during Trimble's arrest about her decision to drop the case, Schrank allegedly made it seem like the case against the defendant was weak. She also mentioned that Trimble's claims of excessive force would look bad in court because Milwaukee County juries don't like cops. This confused the officer, since Trimble had a history of resisting police and a blood alcohol content more than 4 times the legal limit during his most recent arrest. Schrank eventually admitted that Poloo had answered her phone. They both pleaded no contest to a misconduct charge, and as a result, they were fined $500. Since then, Schrank has started her own law firm, specializing in immigration and family law.
9. Jan Popel. In 2018, 34-year-old schoolteacher Jennifer Porcello's life came to an early end along a highway in British Columbia. She was discovered at the scene of a car crash after her boyfriend, Jan Popel's Kia Sorento SUV hit a light pole, initially suggesting that she died in the accident. Popel was unharmed. But Porcello's injuries weren't consistent with only having been in a crash and indicated that she met with foul play. An investigation turned up alarming cell phone footage captured by Popel after he allegedly attacked Porcello with 2 knives, stabbing her at least 47 times. In the video, Porcello can reportedly be heard saying she loves Popel, who responded by telling the victim it was her fault, and that for months and years, all she did was disrespect and take from him. Prosecutors said that Popel made no attempts to save Porcello for over 2 hours, instead running errands and doing his banking while she lay dying in the vehicle. He then crashed the SUV. Popel apologized in court, but it meant little to Porcello's loved ones, who accused him of saying the right words but lacking the tone and emotion to go along with them. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with no parole for at least 15 years. 8. Terry and Jermichael Willis. While responding to a call at an apartment in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2018, police found 25-year-old Aisha Wallace dead from a gunshot wound. Her boyfriend, 30-year-old Jermichael Willis, told officers that she took her own life. But evidence at the scene and autopsy findings suggested that someone may have killed her, and Willis was charged with first-degree murder. A witness claimed that Jermichael's brother, 44-year-old Terry Willis, arrived at the scene before police and helped Jermichael stage a suicide by moving a gun. Terry was also accused of hiding a phone. According to the witness, Terry admitted that he knew Jermichael killed Wallace, but was helping his brother so that he wouldn't get arrested. Jermichael was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 20-year sentence, while Terry faced charges of accessory to murder and intimidating a witness. 7. Gabrielle Davies. High school football player Gabrielle Davies failed to show up for practice one day in 2022, sparking a frantic search throughout the Olympia, Washington area. Police discovered blood inside his abandoned car and the young man's shattered cell phone on the ground nearby, causing everyone to fear the worst. Just hours later, authorities announced that Davies had been safely found. They were perplexed by the fact that he had no shirt or shoes on, yet bore none of the injuries they would expect to see on someone's feet. After walking around barefoot in the wilderness, Davies was cryptic about the circumstances of his disappearance, telling investigators that he couldn't reveal what had happened to him because people connected to his captors would come after him. It was only the beginning of what would turn out to be a truly bizarre case. Shortly after finding Davies, police charged him and another young man, Justin Yoon, with murder in connection with the death of 51-year-old Daniel McCaw, which happened roughly 40 miles, 64 kilometers, from where the suspects live. Davies is accused of staging his disappearance to evade charges in the case. McCaw was found shot and stabbed to death in his home. It was later determined that he had dated Davies' mother, and that the couple had split up just weeks before his murder. Surveillance footage from McCaw's home allegedly shows the suspects crawling in through a doggy door on the day of the crime. They were also seen leaving the house with several items. During an investigation into Davies' disappearance, investigators found a spent shell casing in his bedroom. At the time, they were unaware of McCaw's death, but they ultimately put two and two together. In addition to the mounting evidence against Davies, his father reportedly called law enforcement and implicated his son in McCaw's death, but accused the victim's biker buddies of threatening Davies. Both suspects are being held on $1 million bail, while facing charges of first and second-degree murder, burglary, and unlawful possession of firearms. 6. Pehla Bti. In 2022, a young woman named Hema Chowdhury went missing just outside India's capital of New Delhi in the city of Noida. Her family filed a report as soon as they noticed her unusual absence. That same day, a 22-year-old woman named Pehla Bti wrote a farewell note to her family and left it at their house in the nearby village of Badpura. At the scene, the family found the body of a woman whose face had been disfigured. She was wearing Bati's clothes and, from what anyone could tell, looked like the young woman, and the family suspected no different as they cremated her and went ahead with funeral plans. But details about the case didn't quite add up to investigators, who found Bati and her boyfriend, Ajay Thakur, alive and well, roughly 30 miles, 48 kilometers from where she supposedly took her own life. The pair had even gotten married. As they dug deeper into the case, detectives discovered that Bati had befriended Hema Chowdhury at a shopping mall where she worked in the time leading up to her disappearance. They believe that Bati specifically chose Chowdhury because they looked somewhat similar in appearance, with plans to kill her and use her body to stage the suicide, which is exactly what Bati and Thakur are accused of doing before they ran off to start a new life together. It's believed that Bati was motivated to commit the crime because she blamed her brothers for the death of her parents several months earlier and wanted revenge, but was afraid of retaliation from them so she planned to get retribution anonymously, and probably when they least expected it, when they believed she was dead. But her plan fell apart, and she now faces a murder charge. 5. Mark Brown. 34-year-old British escort Alexandra Morgan vanished in 2021 after traveling to a remote farm in East Sussex to meet a man who sought her services online. When her remains were discovered, all that was left were some charred bone fragments and teeth. Someone had burned her body in an oil drum. While investigating Morgan's disappearance and death, detectives zeroed in on a man named Mark Brown as their prime suspect. They learned that Brown's girlfriend, 33-year-old Leah Ware, had gone missing just months earlier. No sign of her has ever been found, but law enforcement believes that she met a similar end to Morgan, who was locked in a shipping container and kept alive for a certain amount of time before being murdered and burned. Morgan saw Brown several times before things turned deadly. When she disappeared, she had planned a 3-day meeting with him and was expecting a generous payout for it. Her family didn't know she was an escort, so they thought she was with friends. But they knew something was terribly wrong when she failed to return for her 2 children. While looking into both cases, police found surveillance footage showing that Brown picked up his missing girlfriend's prescriptions for months after she vanished to make it appear as though she was still alive. He also made transactions with Ware's bank accounts as part of the attempted cover-up. Brown is currently on trial for 2 murder charges and has not yet revealed the location of Ware's body, despite the urging of her family and the judge. 4. Leslie Moonves. In 2017, a woman went to the Los Angeles Police Department to report that former CBS chief Leslie Moonves had assaulted her back in the 1980s. The complaint came amid the Me Too movement that ushered in a new era of credibility toward assault survivors who had long become accustomed to being victim-blamed and not taken seriously. But just hours after the report against Moonves was filed, an LAPD captain, who's also a former member of Moonves' security detail, contacted a CBS executive directly and warned them. In a voicemail, the captain said that the case was confidential, but encouraged them to call him back. In 2022, the New York Attorney General's office released a report accusing the LAPD captain and CBS employees of conspiring to cover up the case. The report claims that the LAPD provided CBS with case updates, personal details about the accuser, and a copy of her complaint. CBS executives used the information to research the accuser and her family. Both parties are accused of taking measures to downplay the gravity of the allegations. And the LAPD captain reportedly reassured CBS that the department took efforts to prevent the press from obtaining the report against Moonves. In one message obtained by Attorney General Letitia James, Moonves said that hopefully they could figure out what the complainant wants. The findings revealed that the allegations were kept hidden from CBS regulators, shareholders, and the public for 8 months. In the meantime, a high-ranking stakeholder who knew about the case sold 160,000 shares of the company in case the story broke and its value plummeted. The LAPD claims that the captain who informed CBS of the report was the only employee involved in the cover-up, and that the rest of the department was unaware of the scheme. After the details were leaked to the press, Moonves denied the allegations. Both he and CBS have dished out millions in compensation to shareholders and others for misleading investors and to right other past wrongs that the company is accused of. 3. David Stavely. David Stavely was one of the many people who were charged in 2020 with trying to fraudulently obtain COVID relief funds. He was put on an electric monitoring device while awaiting the next step of his case, which included allegations that he attempted to bilk the U.S. government out of more than $500,000. 3 weeks after his arrest, the 54-year-old cut off his monitoring device, delivered suicide notes to his mother and various other family members and friends, and drove to the ocean in Massachusetts. His car was found abandoned near the shoreline with his wallet and a suicide note inside. A search and rescue boat was dispatched to look for his body. While some of Stavely's relatives believed he had taken his own life, some suspected that it was part of a scheme he had concocted to avoid accountability for his alleged financial crimes. They were right. Stavely was alive, and he eluded law enforcement for nearly 2 months before U.S. Marshals captured him in Georgia. During his time on the run, he changed his phone number multiple times and used numerous identities and different license plates in an effort to avoid detection. He managed to slip away for long enough for authorities to actually wonder, at times, if he had actually taken his own life. But they caught up with him, and the stunt earned him extra charges on top of the ones he was already facing for fraud. Stavely pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit bank fraud and failing to appear in court, and was sentenced to over 4 years in federal prison. 2. William Anthony Spivey. William Anthony Spivey resigned from his duties as the chief of the Chowdbourne, North Carolina Police Department in 2021, amid dozens of misconduct allegations. At the time, he was facing over 70 felony charges, including evidence mishandling, drug trafficking, and embezzlement. In early 2022, Spivey failed to return from a fishing trip. His vehicle and boat were found abandoned at a boat landing on the Lumber River in Columbus County. At the scene, investigators found several letters and a rifle containing a discharged round. Friends and family members reportedly described Spivey's disappearance as a possible suicide, but detectives determined that the evidence was inconsistent with someone taking their own life. Further investigation indicated that the scene was likely staged, and authorities would later admit that they immediately doubted the suicide claims, given Spivey's history of trying to dodge a court appearance with a fraudulent note stating that he had COVID-19. During a search that cost taxpayers upward of $64,000, law enforcement tracked Spivey to a relative's home at an apartment complex in Loris, South Carolina. In addition to the charges he was already facing, he was slapped with additional counts for trying to stage his suicide, including obstruction of justice. 1. Sahun. A South Korean man named Lee Dae-jun was on a fishing boat roughly 6 miles, 10 kilometers from the North Korean border when he mysteriously vanished in 2020. His boat was found, but he was nowhere in sight while South Korean authorities searched for him. In the meantime, a North Korean patrol vessel found Lee in a life jacket and shot him dead a few hours after questioning him. There are conflicting stories about the circumstances leading up to the 47-year-old's bizarre death. South Korean officials said that the North Koreans burned Lee's body at sea, presumably as a COVID-related safety measure. Then President Moon Jae-in's staff concluded that Lee was trying to defect to North Korea due to gambling debts and personal issues. Moon's successor, current President Yoon Suk-yeol, reversed the finding and accused the previous administration of walking on eggshells around North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un's regime. Lee's family also doesn't believe that he died trying to defect. Yoon's officials also claim that previous investigators made no meaningful effort to rescue Lee, even after learning that he was spotted in North Korean waters. They suspect former South Korean National Security Advisor Sahun of ordering the destruction of intelligence reports about Lee's death. Sah, on the other hand, has accused Yoon's administration of political retaliation, and Moon has described the allegations as unfounded. Whatever the case, Lee's disappearance and death remain largely a mystery, leaving his loved ones without answers or closure.
Would you rather be accused of helping a criminal cover up their crime, or be known as a snitch in a place that isn't very friendly toward people who cooperate with law enforcement? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!